What's going on, guys? SasDood here. You can just call me Saz. I hope everyone is having a fantastic day. Today, I have another book review, book overview slash book talk, whatever you want to call it, and that is on "Let the Right One In" slash "Let Me In" by John Ajvide Lindqvist. Lindqvist. I don't know how you say his name. I'm sorry for the butchering of his name. But let's just get started. First came across this book by watching the American movie, which is a remake of the Swedish movie, which is based on the original novel. The American movie was called Let Me In, and I had watched it last month during the month of October as I was watching a lot of horror movies. I was amazed by Chloe Grace Moretz and Cody Smith McPhee's portrayal of Eli and Oskar, as well as Hakan. A week or so after, I went to my local manga CD video game store shop and I bought it alongside Orphan with Isabel Furman and the first volume of the original black and white Scott Pilgrim versus the World volume. And after a couple of weeks of on and off reading, I finished the book and I watched the original Swedish movie last night, which is the original, right? But I watched the American movie first, which is a remake of a Swedish film. So I wanted to get my thoughts out since they're all three media of Let the Right One In is fresh in my memory. So, what is this book about? What are my thoughts on it? Who wrote it? And how does it differ to the two different movies? And my thoughts on the movie, both the movies overall. Let the Right One In is a Swedish novel written by John Ajvide Lindqvist. Sorry for the name. I'll just call him Lindqvist. Lindqvist. It was an instant bestseller and won the best named novel in translation in 2005 in Norway. So it pretty much caught on right off the bat. Let the Right One In, which is the original title of the novel, is a slow burn vampire mystery novel that centers around the relationship of 12-year-old Oskar and 12-year-old Eli, as well as Eli and Hakan, her quote-unquote father. Oskar is a lonely, meek boy who is constantly bullied by Johnny and his group of friends. He frequently fantasizes about murdering them by stabbing trees in the forest and collecting newspaper clippings about frequent murders from the newspapers that happen in and around Sweden and Blackeberg. Eli, or Ellie, is a 12-year-old girl who just moved in next door to Oskar. Not much is known about her except that she doesn't feel the cold. She only comes out at night, and her father is withdrawn and only comes out when necessary. The main story starts with the murder of a teenage boy in Sweden who had his blood drained, so the police are describing that as a ritual killing. Spoiler alert, for those who are watching, there's going to be quite a bit of spoilers, as you can't really go without spoilers when describing this type of story. And I need this review to be effective to tell you how it is. Hakan is not actually her father, and that Eli, the 12-year-old girl, is a tried and true vampire who needs blood every day or at least every other day to survive. So Hakan goes out and murders people in Blackeberg and across various towns and states. That's before the book, but in the book, he murders people in Blackeberg to get her that blood. Oskar befriends Eli, and the two of them hit it off pretty quickly, much to the jealousy of Hakan, her caregiver. I think caregiver is a very good word for Hakan. The story doesn't only focus on Eli, Oskar, and Hakan. It quite frequently changes perspective to other characters such as Tommy, Eli's older on and off friend who sniffs glue, and he has his own friend group, and he's an overall delinquent with his own family troubles. We also have a secondary protagonist in the form of Lacke and his group of friends who get embroiled in the murders along the way, with Hakan murdering everyone. And that happens by the way of Jacques, Lacke's best friend, being murdered by Eli. We also quite frequently switch over to Hakan's point of view as he murders and deals with the weight of his actions and age, as he struggles to find a reason to continue murdering with her and to just continue living on for her. Uh, let's talk about the contents of the story. The story is very deep. It's very heavy and touches on very heavy topics such as pedophilia, particularly around young boys, murder, death, bullying, etc. The book frequently, at least in the first half, talks about the attraction to boys by Hakan, his past life, and that how that has affected him, which the book goes quite in depth on. Uh, his past life, how that affects him, how that affects his situation with Eli and the group of friends he used to be friends with. Moving on to the bullying aspect with Oskar is very heavy. Oskar is being described as having incontinence because of the bullying. The bullies hit him, they threaten him, they inconvenience him, they destroy his self-confidence and his ability to fight back. So these topics are very heavy and should not be, taken lightly when it comes to the contents of this book. And if you have like a light stomach for these sorts of topics, this book isn't for you. It's probably the movies that are more so for you, because the movies leave all this stuff out for the most part. There's in-depth explanations as to how Hakan murders and is attracted to boys. Frequent scenes of drinking alcohol and alcoholism with Oskar and his father. His father's an alcoholic. It's an overall heavy book, and if you feel uncomfortable with these topics, like I said, stick to either of the two movies, because the two movies don't really dwell on these topics, if not at all, and they leave a lot more of the heavier stuff at the cost of less character depth and a more hollow feeling story, less context between the characters. Let's talk about the writing. Lindqvist is very descriptive and goes into great detail. The way Lindqvist goes into detail about the empty feelings of the Sweden streets of Blackeberg, the cold loneliness of the apartment, and the loneliness and coldness of winter. You you really feel how cold and how lonely it is in the winter. The description of characters is spot on as well. How he describes Eli as something in between a human and a vampire. Move the camera down a little. The introspective thoughts of all the characters. It sounds like a video game meme, but you kind of feel as if the characters are really alive in a sort of way. The way Oskar is written is entirely realistic and heart-wrenching, and you really feel for him. Same goes for Hakan to a certain extent. I really like how Lindqvist uses the newspaper reports as breaks in the story or as the start of a chapter. And he quite frequently ends a paragraph or sentence with like an abrupt thought or like an affirmation of the character or how they're feeling. And just overall, the writing is very top-notch and is a page-turner, even with its almost 500 page length, right? Almost 1,000 pages, halfway to 1,000 pages. Well, let's get into the characters. Let's get a little bit into, Eli and Oskar. Oskar, like I said, is a heavily bullied child. He's bullied and he fantasizes about killing his tormentors, particularly Johnny and his friend group. He copes in this way by collecting newspaper magazines and stealing candy and toys from the local shops because it makes him feel in control. He uses what he calls a piss ball in the novel. It's like a styrofoam thing he puts, around his penis. And whenever he pees himself because he gets scared or he gets put into a traumatic situation by Johnny and his gang, it kind of like soaks up his pee, his piss. So that's how much they bully him. They bully him to the extent of he just has frequent, he doesn't have control of his bladder, and whenever he does get scared by them, he pees himself. So he has a system in place with the piss ball. I think they call it pee ball, piss ball, where it kind of soaks up some of the urine for him, which, as you can tell, he's extremely weak. He's susceptible to bullying, and he doesn't really believe in standing up for himself. He kind of just rolls over and lets them do what they want with him because it just means, he's not in control, and that it's better for him to just kind of take it facing down and not worry about him to himself, right? And he hides this from his mother and his father as well, who don't know the extent of how deep the bullying is, nor do his teachers or school know how badly he gets bullied, right? Eli, she's a vampire who requires blood to feed on and has sort of a master servant relationship with Hakan to a certain extent. She doesn't really feel cold. She has supernatural abilities. She can fly. She has superhuman strength, things like that. And despite being very, very old, she's not aware of certain modern concepts. Later on in the story, she doesn't know what like a music player is. She's very deep into puzzles and such that Oskar gives her a Rubik's Cube. She doesn't even know what a Rubik's Cube is. And when Oskar does give it to her, the very next day, she solves it instantly. And what's later shown in the book is she just has piles and piles and piles of puzzles because she has to stay out. She has to stay inside the apartment during the day because she's a vampire. The sun will kill her. So she spends time on puzzles and such. She also emboldens Oskar to stand up for himself against Johnny and his gang, almost to the point where it kind of feels like she's taking advantage of him. And she even offers to help Oskar if the bullies go too overboard in bullying Oskar. She is basically his only friend, and they very quickly hit it off, right? And it's kind of weird to say, but she is similar. She's basically a pedophile, right? She's seeking control over Oskar. And these are just very common themes in this book because she's like a very old vampire. She knows what she's doing. She knows how to manipulate Hakan and Oskar as well as other people. And she is being a pedophile, right? Or whatever the scientific name is. You know, there's different sorts of names for, you know, age groups and things like that. Like I said, despite being physically a child, she teases and leads on Oskar, while at the same time giving him positive affirmations whenever he does something good, like when he stands up against Johnny and his gang. She takes advantage of his loneliness. She also plays around with Hakan and his feelings towards her with that servant-master relationship, and she utilizes her appearance to get what she wants when she needs to hunt for blood, when Hakan get it for her. So she kind of utilizes her, you know, frail-looking, girl-like, childlike appearance in order to get what she wants. Finally, we get to Lacke and his friend group. Lacke is kind of like a second protagonist who's affected by the murders by Hakan and Eli, and who tries to take things into his own hands with the help of his friends to a certain extent. Spoiler warning, like I said earlier, Jacques gets murdered by Eli early on into the story, and he falls into a deep alcoholic state at the loss of his best friend. So he finds out that one of his friends, Gosta, I believe is his name, witnesses everything, and he tries to get Gosta to tell the police and things like that, and eventually he tries to piece together the mystery of these murders by himself, right, with the knowledge that has been given to him by Gosta and the newspaper clippings and what he knows is from what he's seen around the city of Blackeberg. He drinks a lot, he's rude, he's old, and no one knows quite what Lacke does, except that he has money despite having no job, and he doesn't really do much besides drink and hang around, walk around the town or hang out with his friends. And all of his friends are like super old. They're like 50-year-olds, right? You kind of really start to root for him, and it's always exciting in the book when you switch to his point of view as a regular human, because he's not in contact with Eli like how Oskar is, and he's not in contact with Hakan like those two are. So he's a sad sort of secondary protagonist you root for despite his shortcomings. But he's a very needed break in a story that can kind of feel a little too much when it comes to Hakan, Eli, and Tommy. Hakan, Eli, and Oskar. I mean, not Tommy. I wrote Tommy there. I don't know why I wrote Tommy. Oskar, right? In their relationships and the heavy contents of the story. Let's talk about the two movies a little. The original Swedish movie is more of a general overview of the story with lots of context and scenarios written out. The Swedish movie, Let the Right One In, is an hour and 44 minutes long. it probably needed to be about 4 or 5 or even 6 hours long to truly explain and go into depth of into the same depth of the original novel. And I don't think it still would have been enough. The movie is pretty faithful to the novel with a small few exceptions cut for the movie to make it brief, such as how the murders happened, the relationship between Hakan and Eli, etc., etc. Things had to be cut out to not make it over 2 hours. Sadly, that means the movie is pretty simplistic, and it lacks the context needed to make the characters, such as Hakan, Johnny and his group of troublemakers, and Lacke and his friends, truly stand out, as well as Oskar. And that's kind of is par for the course when you try to adapt a almost 500-page novel to a 2-hour screenplay. The American remake, Let Me In, takes a different approach. It focuses more on Eli, Hakan, and Oskar, as well as Johnny and his group having a bigger role rather than trying to adapt the whole 500-page novel. It only takes the major plot points and kind of hyper focuses on them, right? Between Oskar and Eli, Eli and Hakan, Oskar and his bullies, Oskar and his school. It threads them all together in a neat, self-sufficient package that stands entirely on its own and gives depth to its characters when needed. I personally believe that both films stand on their own entirely, and I think they are good, and that they kind of deserve their own place amongst the novel, and they tried tackling the same problem with two very different solutions. In some ways, the original Swedish film is superior to the American remake, and in other ways, the American film is superior to the Swedish film in some ways. But as usual, neither of the films surpassed the novel in terms of the topics tackled and the depth and description of Sweden / Blackeberg and its characters. Funnily enough, Let the Right One In was the novel, right? And then it got its Swedish movie. There was no like English dub or whatever. I don't think there is. Maybe there is nowadays, but whenever you search for the movie online, it's usually just a it's just the Swedish language, right? There's no like English dub. But when the American remake got the green lit and they filmed and then they released it, they released a bunch of different books with different covers, right? And they released the same book with the title change, with the title of the movie, Let Me In. So the movie's called Let Me In, and then I think it was the first release of this Swedish novel in the United States. It was called Let Me In, as was the movie, the American remake, right? But that led to a lot of confusion, and later on, they eventually just started re-releasing the book again with the original title, Let the Right One In. So if you look online, they have like books with the movie image of the original actress from Let the Right One In from the Swedish film. They have like covers, I think, with like Chloe Grace Moretz. They have like just random covers and with random different names, because the American film tried to tie the book in, tried to give the book a new audience by tying it in with the film, right? And it didn't really work out. It just led to a lot more confusion. So they eventually just started publishing the novel again under the name Let the Right One In, the original name. So there's a whole bunch of books out there with Let Me In with different covers, and books with Let the Right One In with a bunch of different covers. This one I have, I don't know if it's the latest. This one has the new show on it. This cover kind of sucks. I can't lie. This cover kind of sucks. I prefer like the original covers, but it's whatever. Anyways, sorry for that tangent. It was just a little fun fact. Let's get on to the final point. Is this book worth reading? I would say yes. The way the characters are written and the amount of depth they have, the intermingling threads of Oskar and Eli, Hakan and Lacke's group are all immensely satisfying and well written. The book is a veritable slow burn up until halfway, where it picks up the pace and it kind of wants you to keep turning the page. The content inside, like I said, is not for the faint of heart, and the way Sweden is written makes you really feel the lonely coldness and isolation of Blackeberg and the isolation that Oskar feels and many of the characters feel. Give it a read, and I would recommend watching the movies right after, and you won't be disappointed. If you watch the movies first, you'll kind of miss a lot of context, and you'll miss a lot of the heavier themes, right? I wouldn't really recommend the TV show, though. From what I've seen, it's only the Let the Right One In name only, and it focuses on a separately different kind of like alternate universe type of plot that doesn't really cater to, isn't really like a side piece to the novel, right? Because the movies are side pieces to the original novel. They aren't going to be, they're really their own thing because they wouldn't exist without the original novel. But they can stand alone, just a little, just worse than the original novel, right? So read the book, watch the movies. That's what I recommend. Anyways, I know this was a bit of a longer one, but there's a lot of content to cover in this book, and there's a lot of things to talk about. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you wish to support my artwork and my videos, all my social media and payment tipping links are in my profile. More videos, more artwork will come regardless. Goodbye for now, guys.